Okay, let me see how to turn on the audio.
Hi,
We can hear
Pastor.
you. Yeah, we can hear you, Pastor.
Okay, and we are now streaming to Facebook.
Miss Latrice,
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me?
we can't see you.
Oh my goodness. Okay. See what's going on there. My camera's on.
And Miss April, you need to turn your video off.
Let's see here.
She's muted. Yeah, she's muted. I'm looking.
She is.
Yeah.
Off, but
There she
Tawana
is.
would have to make me disappear. I have my video not there.
I got it. I just
Tawana
did.
has to make me go away.
I did.
Okay. If they still see me.
Yeah, we do still see you.
I don't see her on my end.
Does everybody else see Miss April? I do.
I do.
Yeah, we still see
I
her.
do.
Yeah, I see her. I see her picture.
There's Miss Latrice. We see you, Miss Latrice.
All right, I just switched devices there. I'm not sure what was going on with that, but anyway, the camera wouldn't come on.
Technology, you gotta love it.
I
Yep.
know, right?
I made me go away, but I'm still here.
You're still showing up, Miss April. Okay, looks like we got about 2 minutes. Miss Latrice, I think they're ready.
Okay, is everyone on? Because I'm on a smaller device now. Is everyone on, Miss
It
Joanne?
looks like all your speakers are.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Just tell me when and I will start.
Ms. Joanne, is the pastor on? I don't see.
Your pastor's on.
Okay, all right.
Can you not see him?
No, and that's,
Is he the only one you can't see?
he's the only one I can't see, the only one.
He's there. Well, I can see him.
Okay,
Pastor Wilson,
Hello,
he's
Yeah.
there.
all right,
can you hear me? Okay.
there he is.
I see everyone. I just swiped through, so I see everyone is here.
Right.
Miss Latrice, Miss
Yes.
Tawana said you can start.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another panel sponsored by the Health and Wellness Ministry of New United Church. The panel we're talking about today, men's health awareness. And this is so important because a lot of times we know that men don't like to go to the doctor. And there are just so many other statistics when we start talking about men. And also, we want to talk about this not just from a physical perspective when it comes to men's health, but also from a mental and spiritual perspective as well. Let me introduce our distinguished listing, our guest, our panelists today. Dr. Jeffrey Wilson, pastor of New United Missionary Baptist Church. Dr. Kevin Johnson, internal and addiction medicine. Jay Armstrong, professional counselor from Sound Living Counseling. John Bruce, professional counselor from Destiny Life Counseling. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. And let's jump right in and start by talking about one of the things, and just looking over some statistics today, came across the fact that 1 in 2 men are diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. That's compared to 1 in 3 women diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. Let's start by talking about why is that? And Dr. Johnson, I'll let you jump in and talk about that.
Very, and that is a correct fact. But it leads to a bigger topic, and that is longevity. How long a person lives has always been used as a measure of the health of a population. Now, and I'm coming back to your question there. It's interesting in the US, if you break it into white women, black women, white men, black men, women always outlive men. We've known this throughout eternity. But as it relates particularly to black men have the lowest longevity of about 69 years, whereas white women live about 80. Now, do the math. That's about an 11-year difference. That's significant. Something is going on there. Something is wrong. And it's just what you said. Cancers and heart disease represent 50% of deaths in the US. And those are the number 1 and 2 causes of death, and they disproportionately affect black men. Then you take into other considerations, which we won't get into tonight. George Floyd didn't die of cancer or heart disease. There's other racial determinants in the society that leads to premature deaths in blacks. We take on hazardous jobs. And I won't get off on a tirade, but the point I'm making is there's reasons we're talking about the health of black men today, and it's not what it should be.
And that is so important there, Dr. Johnson, as we talk about that and those statistics. And like you said, we have known that women outlive men. But again, there's so many other factors. Like you said, that's a lot of conversation for a whole nother day as to what attributes to our black men, and especially our young black men dying. Here's another one that we want to talk about when it comes to this. Women are 100% more likely than men to go to the doctor for their annual exam. So I guess for all of you, I'd like to kind of jump in as a male. I'll let Dr. Johnson start. But why is that? Why are men and your friends, your brothers, your cousins, your male friends and colleagues not going to the doctor and getting their annual exams and making regular visits to their doctor's office.
You know, again, I'll start out and be fairly brief, but again, it's a statistic you can't argue with us. I'd love to say you just can't argue with it. But I'll conclude, if we ever going to get the longevity of Black men to increase, there's certain things we're going to have to do. One, we're going to have to do our lifestyle changes, do our exercise, eat more healthy, not smoke and drink less alcohol. Lifestyle changes. We're going to have to eat a healthy diet. And the third component I'm going to throw into that is, what you're just alluding to here, you have to go to the doctor once a year when nothing's wrong. Now, you're going to go more than once a year when you have a problem, when you have a condition. But if there's nothing else I can get across tonight, you need to see the doctor once a year, especially men. And women are great at this. They'll go once a year, but men, you got to go once a year when nothing's wrong.
I would like to hear
Prevention,
that.
that's prevention.
Prevention, that's what's so key, Dr. Johnson, because how many stories have I done where, if you've taken these steps early, if you've just gone to the doctor and caught this in stage 1 or early stage rather than stage 3, we'd be talking about something much more different here when it comes to treatment, outcome, life, and so forth. For all the other gentlemen on the panel, Pastor Wilson, talk about that and men going to the doctor and taking care of themselves as far as health, and also why this is important that as a church that we are spreading this message, educating people and encouraging people to take better care of themselves.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you now. Yes. Now you're on.
Well, I think that, so I want to answer my thought on the question. I always think from this sort of sociological lens, and I think that part of the problem is the way that in society, we sort of raise and indoctrinate boys who eventually become men. And there's this sort of bravado and this toughness and independence. And I think the word is control, that we want to have. And so I think that as we become men, and the answer why the church has to come along, it's okay to be vulnerable as a man, to go to a doctor, and I think the church has to help spread that message, because I think a lot of men are still, they are men in body and in age, but they are boys in terms of sometimes the way that we think. And I hope that makes sense. So you have a 50-year-old man who is a chronological man, but his mindset about certain things, and the thing we're talking about tonight is his health, is that he's a kid. And so we as the church have to come in and we have to sort of deconstruct what society has taught us about men, that men, if you're sick, suck it up, do what granddaddy did, just lay down. A lot of my friends, the answer to everything that they have, unless they are bleeding to death, just lay down and you'll feel better. And that's just not the case. And a lot of men are lying down and are not waking back up, per your statistics. So we have to do a job within faith-based to let men know it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, I don't feel well. It's okay to go to a doctor, a counselor. And I think it all goes together. And a lot of it, again, stems from American society, Western society, society in general, how boys, because it doesn't start when, and I say that it doesn't start when the man is 45, 50. It begins when he is 15, 12, 21, it is okay to get help, be it emotional help, if you need help or for something physical. But that same 21-year-old kid who is a young man who is tough and says that he can knock down the world and he is invincible, that young man eventually becomes 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, and then unfortunately carries that same mindset into adult life as it relates to hypertension or diabetes or cancer, and then just thinks that he can just whip it without any kind of help, and it doesn't work that way. So the church has to be proactive in spreading, sort of deconstructing and then reconstructing a more appropriate model of manhood.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of deconstructing, reconstructing, and really reprogramming people as to the way that they think and their behavior. And speaking of that, Mr. Armstrong, let's talk about why is mental health, it goes without saying, is so important. During the pandemic, mental health became just a major focus because there were so many people who had to deal with so many issues during the past year. Some fared better than others. But when it comes to men, a lot of times it's this thing that that's taboo. We don't talk about mental health or those issues or needing help to talk with someone, you know. How do we change that mindset and get more men to open up and to reach out for help when it comes to mental health?
Yeah. And I want to touch on what Dr. Johnson mentioned earlier in regards to giving some statistics. And I want to give a couple of statistics regarding mental health and how it affects men in particular, and even Black men to a greater extent. For example, suicide and stroke, they're ranked as leading causes of death among men. And Dr. Johnson would also substantiate that when you start talking about stroke, high anxiety and high blood pressure, those are leading risk factors for stroke. More than 6 million men are affected by depression in the United States every single year. And there's some estimates within the Black male population, it's even higher. Men die by suicide at a rate of 4 times higher than women. They also die to alcohol-related causes at 62,000 in comparison to women at only 26,000. Men, we're also 2 to 3 times more likely to misuse drugs than women are. And so, yeah, this thing about, you know, why we don't seek help when we obviously need it is because of these misconstrued masculinity norms. We have a twisted understanding of what it means to be strong, what it means to be a male. And we forget that we're human first before we're male. We're human beings. And so when you start talking about how do we get this conversation going, I will say that having forums such as this, fellowshipping with other men and letting them know that it's okay. It's okay to say, I need help, right? Recommending therapy. That's another huge, and I'll tell you, one of the things that's come out of the pandemic, as you mentioned, Latrice, is that there has been this increased awareness regarding mental health. We stayed busy. I know here at Sound Living, a lot of men were actually reaching out because they were really feeling like they were powerless, like they didn't have the answers. You know, and one of the first things I do with my guys in my office, basically, is I'll tell them, I said, listen, I give kudos and shout out to you for coming here, because that's a sign of strength, being able to recognize where you're not, where you should be, right? It's not a condemnation, right? It's actually reason for celebration, because that's where healing begins. First, acknowledging where you need the healing. So I think that forums such as this, communications, via the circles that we engage in, like communication in the barbershop. I was at the barbershop not too long ago, getting my beard trimmed, basically, and engaged a couple of brothers in conversations about mental health, right? It has to happen in the church. You know, Pastor Wilson, I know, is real big on mental health and talking about the issues that you know we're plagued with in society, and specifically as men. So this is kind of where it starts, okay? And if we can continue the dialogue and let men know that it's about being well, as opposed to this misconstrued identity regarding masculinity, then that's when we'll become better.
I think there's so many points that I'm going to piggyback off there, but I want at this time get to Mr. Bruce talking about, because Jay, you touched on something, and alcohol, substance abuse in men, a huge factor. And that plays into, again, Mr. Bruce, when it starts talking about longevity, quality of life. You see men in their 50s or 60s, and, you know, after years of abusing their bodies through alcohol and drugs and different things, it has taken a toll on them. That is something else that, you know, I think that a lot of families just kind of sweep under the rug. Like, oh, he takes a couple of drinks here and there, or, you know, he's had a little bit too much. But there comes a point that you have to say, hey, that's a problem.
Absolutely, Latrice. I'm glad you said that. So many families have swept these issues under the rug for many years, especially in minority communities. We've seen where stereotypes have kept us from being able to reach our potential. And many individuals just don't understand how crucial mental health is and how important it is to take care of yourself. And as Jay stated earlier, we do know that alcohol use and drug use is higher among men than it is among women. And so it's just about awareness. It's about prevention. It's about education. And I am glad that Pastor Wilson is on the forefront in terms of the spiritual aspect of this, because churches have to get involved. I'm an associate minister at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Lafayette, and one of the things that we've done is try to create a gap in terms of health and wellness by offering fresh fruits and vegetables to people in the community. And so often we don't realize how many minorities live in what we call food deserts, where they don't have access to fruits and vegetables and things so that they can live healthy. We don't talk about the disparities that exist in terms of equal access to health care. So we as men, we have to do a better job at training our men to look past those stereotypes where we were told that, you know, you don't have to go to the doctor, or, you know, it's unmasculine to be emotional and to address mental health issues. The other day, I read a statistic about how at least 50% of men that experience depression in their lifetime don't go to the doctor. They don't talk to anybody about it. And somehow I think we have been taught that it's a sign of masculinity to, you know, we're going to be tough about this and just get through it. And so many of these stereotypes are crippling us as men. And substance abuse is a major, major issue. And I'm glad to be partnering with Sound Living Counseling to offer addiction courses to those in the community that are struggling with addiction. This is something that we have to address.
We do, because again, it's something that, you know, people just say, you know, it's just a little problem there. No, it's not a little problem. It's a major problem if it's something that you can't control or something that you have to have every day. And I think that also as we talk about this, and we just kind of we have some questions here, but this is time to open up about a conversation. And I always tell panelists, I want you to just jump in. But one of the things too, in talking about this, I remember talking to a gentleman, and I remember him saying that he's in his 50s now and saying that he remembers when he was young. And I remember this just stuck out to me. And his dad died when he was a teenager, and he was crying, and his uncle came and said, you know, no, none of that stuff, no crying. You got to toughen up and be the man of the house for your mom. And I remember saying, like, kind of shocked, that your uncle really told you that? And so it's one of those things where, again, I think that it's like with young men, like our young black men, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be emotional. It's okay to be sad. This isn't a sign of weakness. You know I constantly have the conversation and ask my son, you know, how are you feeling? Everything okay? Anything you want to talk about? And I think that that's one of the things that we have to do, is to continue to keep those lines of conversation open, because Jay, I know that you know this too. There are so many, we went through this where we saw so many young Black men committing suicide. And that's an example, I mean, a prime red flag that we need to do something and reach out to these young men.
Absolutely, Latrice. You know, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us to deal with stereotypes that exist about healthcare and stereotypes that exist even about the church and about spirituality. You know, when we think about men and how many men are not attending church compared to women, that has been a statistic that we have seen for years in the church. And so I'm thankful that Dr. Wilson, Pastor Wilson, is addressing mental health in the church and how important healthcare is, because traditionally these are things that we have pushed to the side, that now I think we're starting to realize that as leaders and pastors and ministers, we must be on the forefront of helping individuals to become whole. And that is not just in terms of their spiritual health, but their physical health, their financial health, their mental health. And it's, you know, I think it's crucial to realize how all of these different issues intersect one another. Because if a person is not well in terms of their mental health, it's going to impact their spiritual health. It's going to impact their emotional health. And so, you know, we've just got to do a better job of bringing all of these factors into play if we're going to help people to truly find healing.
Pastor Wilson, I think one of the things too that, you know, you talked about, and they keep mentioning about the importance of what you're doing, bringing this to the forefront, because a lot of times we talk about in the church, again, our spiritual health, but you talk about you to have a holistically healthy person, which also includes their mental health and their physical health, is so important for an overall healthy congregation and church, and about meeting people where they are.
Right. Yeah, you're right, Latrice. Yeah, for me, you know, I had this epiphany of sorts a couple of years ago, and just through various situations within the church. But I guess the idea for me was that in order, as a pastor, you know, we have this primary job and we talk about spiritual health and spiritual things and things of that nature. But, you know, in talking to people and ministering to people, it just became apparent, or more apparent, that, as my wife says, you can't separate the issues. If a person is struggling economically, financially, because that's a big big issue, it affects you can't worship you're not free to worship, you know. So economics, you know, education's been a big piece to me, healthcare, and I think the word was already used, this sort of interconnectedness. One of the things I read something that, you know, in the West African religion, the Yoruba religion, they have an understanding around this idea that we talk about in Westernism, spirit, soul, and body. And so in Western theology, we tend to separate, or the theologians, they separate. And they say your spirit is over here and your mind is one thing and your body is your body. And there's this attempt to draw this sort of clean split between the three of them. But the West African school of religious thought, they understood there was an interconnectedness. There was a synergy between your spirit and your mind and your soul, and you just weren't able to separate. So I try to bring that into my understanding, that your education, your level, your employment, your physical health, your economic status, all of that affects your ability to gain access to health, your comfort level. And so that's what I do. And I think it's important, again, for churches, synagogues, faith-based organizations, because you're not doing your job. And as each his own. If a minister just says, I'm just going to just preach, I'm not worried about education, I'm not really getting into, affordable care, health care, that's not my issue, you will learn very quickly that what goes on out there affects what comes inside your house of faith. And so I think it's the church's responsibility not to tell people what to do, but to encourage its parishioners to become educated about issues. We're talking about now the vaccination. We taking some leadership, my wife and I, the congregation. I got it. I received it. She received it. And again, my message, make an informed decision. But I don't think that the church can afford to just sit back. I don't care if it's about the COVID vaccination, a flu vaccination, you name it. I don't think that we can just sit in this sort of a bubble and just, watch things happen and not speak up. So that's been my posture since I've been the pastor, and I plan to continue to do as much.
And that really is, that's so important, because again, like you were saying, there's so many other issues that impact people, that affect people and their ability to worship, or, even come to church, or have the desire to come to church. And these are some of those things, and which is why it's so important for churches to really take an interest and to take the lead on these issues, and to reach out to members, and to reach out and to really raise awareness on these issues. Let's talk about, when it comes to these issues and mental health, some of the things that men and all people can be doing when it comes to taking care of your mental health and preventing severe mental health issues. What are some of the steps that can be taken?
Well, yeah, I'll be happy to chime in on that one. First and foremost, as has been mentioned, seeking help, right? Alleviating the stigma entails seeking help, and people that receive help speak and talk about the help that they've received, right? Quite a few of the referrals that I get are from clients that have basically just spoken with their friends and their family, and just provided their testimony on how seeking help, seeking counseling has helped them. So a lot of times when a lot of the men I see come into the office, I try to assess them for what sort of self-care that they regularly engage in. And not surprisingly, unfortunately, it's very little. It's very little. A lot of times, a lot of men come into the office and they have attempted to deal with a lot of the issues that they're having through self-medication, right? Through drinking or smoking or doing whatever quick fix that they can find to sort of deaden the anxiety or the depression that they're feeling. So we do a great deal of speaking in my sessions about self-care, what that looks like, right? So obviously therapy is one of those things. Another thing I attempt to do is sort of assess what really motivates my guys, right? What they love doing, right? The hobbies that they find time for or don't have time for, quote unquote, and just having them tied back in to those things that give them joy, right? A lot of times my guys will say, well, I just don't have time to do it. And I tell them, you know what, none of us has more time than anyone else. Every single one of us only have 24 hours in the day, right? So what we have to do is allocate that time. And the things that are important enough to us, we allocate time for it. And so why isn't our mental health worthy of allocating that time? So what we do, I look at my guys, I look at their schedule, and we sit down in the office sometimes and we map out a plan to where they can engage in self-care, right? If it's no more than just going fishing or taking a bike ride or listening to some good jazz, right? Reconnecting with nature. One of the things I developed, I sort of developed and came into practicing during the pandemic was gardening, believe it or not. I never saw myself in a million years gardening, right? But I always thought it was interesting. I thought I'd give it a whirl. Come to find out, I'm pretty good at it, right? So I talk to my guys a lot about finding what it is that gives them passion. And if they don't know, we figure it out together, okay? So self-care is huge. Tying clients back into their resources, right? Talking about faith. And one of the things I love about Sound Living Counseling is that, we're all academically trained, obviously, but we also bring faith into the picture when our clients need it as well, when they request for it. So a lot of the guys that come to the office, they may not have set foot in the church, but just through testimony and talking about my experiences, right? What the role rather that faith has played in my life and the lives of others that I've seen. Sometimes it sparks and kindles that, you know what, maybe I need to reconnect back to my roots. Because a lot of us, we grew up in the church. We just sort of drifted away over the years, right? Life has gotten in the way. But so what I do, and I consider myself a facilitator of sorts, because I just tie clients back into their sources, right? Their resources. And that's how we approach it here at Sound Living, right? We thank the clients for coming in, we applaud them for coming in, and we go to work and just sort of tie them back to what it is that sort of fills their vessel, because none of us can serve from an empty vessel, okay? So we refill that vessel, and in the refilling of that vessel, these men reach out to other people, okay? Their friends, their family, and that's how it begins.
That's a very good point again about refilling that vessel. And I want to kind of jump around and talk a little bit about, because also now going back to the physical aspect of it. And Dr. Johnson, for men who are on listening, let's remind men about some of the key screenings that they should be getting and when they should be getting those screenings.
Yeah, the importance of that annual physical exam, because we'll go over the schedule. For instance, for instance, the colonoscopy exam at about 50 years old, and again at 60 years old. That's a good screening exam. You know, when women automatically know about their breast exams and their pap smears, but these are preventative type measures, and that's the importance of it. And one last thing, I'm going to piggyback on what Jay said as well. Why this preaching on prevention? If you develop one disease, such as heart disease, it tends to be accompanied by other diseases. We call this comorbidity. You never see heart disease by itself. The cholesterol has to be high, the blood pressure will be high, and there may be a stroke accompanying the heart disease. You never see cancer by itself. There will be deep venous thrombosis in the legs. There'll be pulmonary embolisms in the lung with the heart disease. Do not let the horse out the barn, because he tend to bring other horses with him out the field, and they all are running awry. Prevention. And there's one last point I wanted to make. Chronic diseases such as heart disease, cancer, diabetes, hypertension lead to depression. They lead to mental health issues. And if you let your mental health issues go awry, they tend to lead to chronic diseases. It's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle. You've got to prevent this. You got to prevent this from happening.
That's so important, because you talked about how all this kind of interconnects, the physical with the mental. And I want to go back, you talked about some of those screenings, but one of the things, Dr. Johnson, over the years that research has shown too, is that it's so important a lot of times for African Americans, in certain cases, they need to be screened earlier than typical, than what the screening says. Sometimes if it says 50 with a colonoscopy, some doctors will tell you African Americans need to start getting screened at 45. What are your thoughts?
Oh yeah, a classic example of that. You're absolutely right. A classic example is the PSA level for prostate cancer. 50 years old for most people, not for Black men. That really need to be done at about 40 years old. Breast cancer screening in the women, that need to be done a little bit earlier in Black women or so. And statistically, and that's statistics. That statistics show you need to get started early in those in these cases. You're absolutely right.
And I guess that one of the reasons why we're talking about this and getting started early and trying to encourage people to say, hey, if you have not had your prostate screening, if you have not checked your blood pressure lately, is because a lot of times, by the time, the death rate is so much worse in African Americans. And we know that for any of us who've read medical information before or dealt with medical stories, that the death rate is higher in African Americans because of the fact that by the time that we go to the doctor, our case has progressed in a lot of cases, and it's so much worse than it originally had to be because we didn't go on the front end to get checked out. So that's one of the things that we really want to stress to people is to go see, first of all, your primary care physician, and then to make sure that you have gone through this checklist of all of these screenings that you need and maybe some other things that you are at risk. And something else, Dr. Johnson, talked about the fact that we know that some things run in our family. So we need to be on the lookout for that. If you know that your mom or your dad had high blood pressure or diabetes, like I know in my case, I am constantly, when I go to the doctor, making sure that I'm getting all of this checked out to make sure that if there's anything wrong, then I can tackle it right then. So that's another thing I'm sure that doctors want to stress to their patients.
And I love the concept you're bringing up there. You cannot prevent some diseases from happening. If they're in your family, they're in your genes. But I tell you what you can do, you can get an early enough start in detecting them that you could prevent complications. So a diabetic does not have to lose his leg. A diabetic does not have to go blind. You could live to be 9 years old and keep your eyes and your legs if you take care of yourself at a young age.
And I want to add something also to what Dr. Johnson just mentioned. Let's think about, knowledge of things that actually run in our families. I remember going to the doctor years ago and filling out a questionnaire. And, I can only think back to one generation, when the form started asking about medical history, right? I can only think back to one generation, and I had to actually text my dad and ask, hey, does this run in our family? Or have we had any issues with this? Because as African-American, and specifically African-American males, we just don't have that history, medical history, which is really shameful. Here it is, 2021, right? And I don't really know anything at all about my grandfather's medical history. So that's why it's even more important for us to make sure that we're hitting those, as we hit these milestones in age, we need to make sure that we have the accompanying medical appointments made, right? Because we don't want to continue this cycle. We want to break this cycle, right? But this is kind of where it starts. Saying, listen, you know what? I'm not going to continue not knowing what the medical condition of my family or what my genes are medically. I want to make sure that and I mentioned this to one of my clients. I've got a daughter. She's 14 years old. Beautiful, beautiful young lady, obviously. And I'm not jaded in it at all.
You're just a proud papa.
I am. And, the thing is, I want to walk her down the aisle one day when she gets married. I want to give her away. I want to be there when she has her first baby, right? I would love to be here when she has children, basically, that are graduating from high school. But we can't do this as men. And we all want this as men. We want to live long, fulfilling, healthy lives. But we can't do this if we aren't taking care of ourselves. And I tell a lot of guys who come in the office, listen, man, when these guys talk about how they love their families, well, if you love your families, one of the best things you can do is be here for them and be here for them and healthy, right? And then when I mention that, it sort of clicks like, oh yeah, that does make sense. So I tell guys, get your butt, listen, if you're 30, 40, 50 years old, make an appointment, right? A lot of these guys, they even have insurance and they haven't been to the doctor in years. It's unacceptable. And I let them know that if you're responsible, if you love your family, you're going to take care of yourself so you can take care of your family. And that clicks to a lot of them.
And you're right. I think that's so true when you start talking about that, being there for your family and for those moments. And, so many people, they think about that, Jay, like, being there for when our children, get to a certain point in life. And, we think back of our parents were there in those special moments. And again, and you said something there. What is it that clicks? Sometimes just telling people, like when we talk about the vaccination right now, of course, we've been doing all of this about, President Biden is going to probably miss his 70% of the vaccination goal. And you start looking at some of these states and where we are. And I know we talked a little bit about even things like that, about getting vaccinated. Well, we know that in certain communities who are hit the hardest, they're also the most apprehensive still about getting vaccinated. So it really is about finding that message and that connection that resonates with them and says, okay, it clicks. And they're saying, I do need to do something. This is important. And I still think that that's the challenge. There are all these things like you all have been talking about, men in the barbershops. It's kind of like women when we go to the beauty shop. You know, that's kind of our therapy session for, you know, an hour and a half or 2 hours. But I really do like the fact that I've seen how barbershops and different places where people gather, it's not necessarily a formal gathering, but that's when you can reach people where they are in their comfort zone.
Latrice, if I could just chime in as well really quickly. Years ago, I worked with a project that was sponsored by the American Cancer Society. It was called Fruit of the Spirit. And one of the things that we did is we actually went into churches and sponsored cooking classes and aerobics classes. And it was amazing to me how the parishioners came together and, you know, they brought their children and they brought their grandchildren to be a part of something that was challenging them just to be better individuals, spiritually, physically, emotionally. And I just think, especially in the African-American community, we've got to find ways to change some of the traditions that we have so that we can be better people. And I'm just thinking about how years ago when I was coming up in the church, we used to have testimony service. And one of the things that my pastor did down at Mount Zion is doing, I believe it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. He has individuals to come in and to share their testimony about being cancer survivors. And I think we need to do the same thing during Prostate Cancer Awareness Month, because there are men that have a testimony, that have a story to tell about how their lives have been changed. So I think there's so many creative ways that we can really bring this awareness about healthcare to the forefront of our ministries and of our churches. So that's just something that we've done.
Well, that is so important, and that is a valid point. And I will tell you, Mr. Bruce, you will not get an argument from me there when it comes to testimonies and health and sharing that with others, because you never know what a difference that's going to make in someone else's life. So that is definitely something that I wholeheartly agree with. You know, I think as we kind of wrap up here, one of the things too, you said, you touched on so many points that I'll bring Pastor Wilson back in right here, because we talked about churches, and there's so many things that have changed about churches. When you talked about testimony and just kind of the whole concept of things, but then also you think about when we used to have meals, or we have meals at churches, it was usually always fried chicken and so many starches and calories and dessert. And how we now, it's like when you know better, you do better. And so I remember just talking the other day, doing an interview with a chef out in the Bay, and she was talking about how on the West Coast, about how healthy cooking and soul food is taking on this whole life of its own now. And that's another way right there when we're talking about educating people in the church. We all like to eat in the church, but we can do so in a healthy way.
Yeah, you know, people like their chicken, and you know, that's the bottom line with that. But I think, again, a lot of it, you know, where historically, you know, you can't separate people from their history, their tradition. You know, church people were, I guess, rural and pigs and cows and, you know, that kind of thing. So there's some growth to be done and education. But someone said something to me earlier, and the word I wrote down was intentionality. And we all have 24 hours in a day, and it's what you choose to do. And I think that, you know, certainly as a faith leader, and the piece that I hadn't talked about tonight was the role of faith. And again, not trying to tell people what their faith should be. My faith is Christian, but the importance of faith and why you need to have a spiritual connection. You know, I made a note, as men, we spend a lot of time going to the gym. Those of us who are into that, you know, I go to the gym, I walk, or we exercise, and then we work on other things. You know, we're trying to grow our bank account, our retirement, and we should do those things. But oftentimes as men, we neglect our faith. And your faith is where you get your centeredness. And a lot of the other, faith doesn't take the place of counseling. Don't get me wrong. Faith doesn't take the place of a medical doctor, but it helps you. And it helps you when you're dealing with various issues of life. So I think as the church, in a society that is more pluralistic, secular, as the sociologists say, we've got to overemphasize the importance of faith, continue to emphasize health, and then to your point, we need to model said practices. It doesn't help for me to preach about healthy eating and then we have all the unhealthy food. So we've got to do our best to model certain things in front of people. But the main message for me as a faith-based leader, the church has always been a focal point in society, but especially within the African American culture. And we've got to get back to some of that. I don't know if we can get back to all of it, because we have generations now that are growing up and their parents didn't raise them in church. So church is just not what they are accustomed to doing. But years ago, the church was the restaurant, it was the hospital, it was the schoolhouse, it was the gymnasium, everything. It was the movie theaters. You stayed in church all day. So now we know that people have a lot more options. And those options sometimes, take precedent over coming. And then now we're in the age of technology. So now there's this new narrative. Do I need to physically come to church? Why can't I get the word and drink my coffee and sit in my pajamas? So as faith-based leaders, we haven't addressed some of that now, and the importance of fellowship and communication and connectedness. But we've done some work as faith leaders. We've got more to do. I think that the role of faith, the importance of faith is important in that addressing that whole person. Whole meaning the Hebrew Greek word complete, that you are healthy physically or in the best health you can be. You are emotionally, you're taking breaks, you're going on vacation, you're going to see these fine counselors and doing those type of things, but you're not neglecting that spiritual component. And that would be my message to all men.
That's a very good message there. And let me ask you all as we begin to close and just to wrap up, to give those watching some closing thoughts when it comes to men's health and the importance also of mental health, whichever aspect you would like to speak on. Dr. Johnson, I'll begin with you.
Okay. Two closing thoughts, and that is Black men in particular not living as long as they should. But the good news to that is there's good news. There's things we can do: preventive health, a diet, preventive medicine. There are things we can do to get this longevity to increase. The last thing I want to say, I'm actually piggyback off Mr. Bruce, and I know he'll probably respond too. I'm a primary care doctor, but the government has recruited me to become educated in substance abuse. The substance abuse problem is so bad until the government have actually come to primary care doctors like myself and educated us and certified us. And I'm a certified Suboxone doctor that helps. So what I'm saying is, I want my community to know: do not sit out there and suffer with substance abuse. Do not sit out there and suffer with depression. It's not necessary these days. And that's it. I'm through.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Armstrong.
I am a real big fan of, and I think Pastor Wilson mentioned it, in fellowshipping, right? Reaching out to those in your circle, those in your family, and those friends, and being bold enough to talk about the things you struggle with, right? That's what takes actually real courage. Speaking to other brothers about things that you struggle with, because a lot of times, guys, if one of our friends is bold enough right, to speak on vulnerability and things that he may be having trouble with, it's encouraging to us as well. We feel more inclined to do the same. So I encourage every man that comes into my office, I encourage them to reach out to their friends, right, in their circle. And if enough of us are doing this, basically, okay, because as we all know, word of mouth is strong. If enough of us continue to do this, that's going to help alleviate this stigma that we have, specifically as men, right? And in regards to this thing about, you know, the masculinity norms, again, this is how we break those down. So I'm really, really big in fellowshipping, reaching out to brothers and having these and being bold enough to have these conversations with our so-called friends. Because if they're really and truly our friends, we can have these conversations with them, right? And if they're really our friends, they'll listen, okay? So I encourage us men to sort of fellowship and be bold in talking about areas in where we struggle, because that's how we become better. That's how we become stronger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruce.
Yes, my closing thoughts would just be to men everywhere to hold on to your faith. We know, according to cancer research, that prayer is such an integral part of helping individuals that are going through cancer treatment and the impact that prayer can have on their lives. We also know in regards to substance abuse, there's been so much research that has been done to prove that those that embrace the concept of spirituality, how they are able to overcome substance abuse. So my message would simply be to hold on to your faith, to remember that it's never too late to get help. And then last but not least, there's an African proverb that says that it takes a village to raise a child. And so one thing we have to remember is that all of us together are stronger. And if we all get involved in the fight to teach our young boys and our young men about healthcare and wellness and mental health together, we truly can make a difference.
I think that is so important. And as we wrap up, and I'm going to let Pastor Wilson have the final closing thoughts there, but just the whole thing about, I think you realize that it truly does take a village. So many of these things that you men are saying is so important, because you have this group, and, you know, it's like, you know, sometimes a child may listen to one person when they may not listen to mom or dad. So all these things are just so very important. And that, again, for men to reach out to our young men and to meet them where they are and to let them know it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not be okay. And I think that those are just some of the things that we really want to stress to our young men and our young women, just people in general, but specifically as we talk about men and the issues and the problems and the challenges that they face in society every day. Pastor Wilson?
Well, as we wind down, and I certainly thank all of the men, the brethren, for coming out this evening. My mind is, I read a lot of different books, and one of the books that I read a little while back, the book was entitled Spirit, Soul, and Body. And the writer, Andrew Womack, he talked about this concept of what he calls spiritual mindness. And again, it's this idea that it really, in order to experience life, you've got to have these connections, and it is to family, it is to God. And then he talks about this idea of how we get those connections. And he goes and he dissects the narrative in Genesis of Adam and how we as men search for identity. And it's this whole idea of who I am and God asking where we are and that kind of thing. And then we know the narrative about the fruit. But I think the idea has been mentioned. For men, we have a lot of challenges. Society puts a lot on us. This idea, again, of provider and what that means. And then when you add to that some of the challenges that men of color have, men of certain economic status, and a lot of men don't feel like a man just because of a lot of things. And someone said it already, you know, we've got to sound that message that, you know, brother, you are needed. You know, whether you are the primary provider, you know, you have the biggest paycheck, or whether you are your title, any of that, you're needed. Your children, even if you hadn't sired biological children, none of that really mattered. Someone needs you. And I think that when men or anybody, when you feel that way, you're just more inclined to do what you need to do, be it your physical health or just whatever. But just the reality, we do have a lot of men who, 40, 50, 60, older, and they just feel like, hey, if I leave tomorrow, no one will miss me. And that is not true. And again, from a faith-based perspective, from counseling, society, we have to send a different message. We've talked about a lot of issues, gun violence, what makes a 13-year-old boy pull out a gun on another 13-year-old boy? Something is missing. But we've got to really continue to address all of those issues and not, again, think that we have the luxury to look at things in isolation. I don't have to talk about gun violence because the neighborhood I live in, nobody's shooting anybody like that. If one of us hurts, all of us hurt. And this COVID-19 it exacerbated what we already knew. It didn't create it. Like I always tell people, it's like a hurricane, a storm, and then your roof leaks. You already had a bad roof. It just exposed some cracks that you already had. And so this COVID-19 again, and it tore through minority communities. And so we just need to continue to have these conversations. I think thank these gentlemen for coming. We got to have more of these type of conversations with our men and make sure that they listen. We got to get some young men to come. So maybe next time we get a 25-year-old and get him on the panel, let him talk, because we need to hear their voices as well. So that's all I have. But again, I think this was a great discussion, one that is continually needed, and hopefully we can continue to have it. Thank you.
Pastor Wilson, to all the panelists, thank you so much for joining us today and lending your expertise and this information and just having this really open discussion and dialogue, because that's where change starts, with conversation and with dialogue like this. And to the New United Health and Wellness Ministry, I can't say this enough. To Joanne, to Gwen, to all of you on there, thank you so much. That incredible team, Tawana back there, helping out behind the scenes for putting this on. Ladies, thank you all so much. And again, thank you all and everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.